The year was 1485, a time when England was gripped by war and uncertainty. This land was marked by betrayal, bloodshed, and the echoes of countless battles. Soldiers wore worn armor, standing weary yet determined amid the scars of war. The battlefield still whispered stories of courage and loss in this bitter struggle for power. The origins of this conflict began with questions about who truly had the right to rule the throne. The House of Lancaster held the throne through Henry VI, but his weak leadership and bouts of madness left many nobles frustrated. Meanwhile, the House of York, descended from an older line of Edward III, claimed a stronger heritage and a more legitimate right to rule. This clash between two powerful families, each with their own pride and claim, set the stage for a fierce civil war. Inside Grand Council halls, nobles debated and schemed, their rivalries fanning the flames of conflict. This was no ordinary war between distant armies. It was family against family, father against son, brother against brother. Alliances were fragile. Lords switched sides as easily as changing their flags. One night you could be a loyal subject, and by dawn branded a traitor without warning. In this age, betrayal wasn't just common, it was survival's cruel currency, often demanding a sacrifice of honor. In the midst of a turbulent era, Richard Plantagenet entered the world on October 2, 1452 at a grand castle. He was the youngest son of a powerful duke and a noblewoman known for her grace and strength. His family banners, symbols of the House of York, proudly flew high over the fortress, marking their claim and legacy. With a birthright tied to grand ambitions, Richard was destined to stand at the center of history's turning wheel. Richard's early years were darkened by the roar of battle and loss. At just 8 years old, he lost his father and older brother at the fierce Battle of Wakefield. Their heads were displayed on spikes at the gates of York, sending a chilling message to all who saw. For young Richard, the innocence of childhood was replaced by sorrow and the brutal realities of war and power struggles. After a tragic setback, Richard's eldest brother Edward stepped up and rallied the Yorkist forces with fierce determination. In March of 1461, Edward delivered a crushing blow to the Lancastrians at the Battle of Towton, one of England's bloodiest battles ever recorded. At just 19 years old, Edward claimed the throne, becoming King Edward IV and marking a turning point in history. For Richard, now the brother of a king, the future shone bright but was also filled with challenges and uncertainty. Even though Edward claimed the crown, the battle was far from over. In 1470, Richard and his brother were forced into exile after their powerful ally turned against them. Richard Neville, the famous kingmaker, restored Henry VI to the throne, leaving Richard without a clear future. As a teenager, Richard lived in Burgundy, welcomed but still unsure of his place and safety. In 1471, Edward returned from exile, rallying support to reclaim his throne. At the Battle of Barnet, Richard stood fiercely loyal beside his brother as Warwick fell in the chaos of war. Their fight continued at Tewkesbury, where Edward crushed the last of the Lancastrian resistance. Victorious, Edward and Richard entered London to reclaim the crown and restore their power. For his unwavering loyalty, Richard was granted vast estates and became Duke of Gloucester, taking residence at Middleham Castle. In his youth, Richard showed remarkable loyalty and leadership on the battlefield. He rode into battle alongside his brother, commanding with both strength and strategy. Chroniclers praised his courage and discipline, qualities that earned him great respect among his soldiers. Not yet the villain Shakespeare would paint. Richard was a prince shaped by loyalty, loss, and the harsh realities of war. Edward trusted Richard to govern the rugged north of England, a borderland often threatened by Scotland. From his stronghold at Middleham Castle, Richard quickly established himself as a fair and effective leader. He gained the respect and loyalty of northern nobles by being both just and decisive in his decisions. Locals and peasants would come before him, recognizing his authority and seeking his judgment. Over these years, Richard became one of the most powerful men in the kingdom, shaping the fate of the northern border. Richard solidified his power by marrying Anne Neville, daughter of the influential kingmaker. This marriage brought him significant wealth and claims to lands that once belonged to Warwick. It also connected Richard to a family deeply involved in the turbulent wars of the time. Together, Richard and Anne had a son, Edward of Middleham, continuing their important legacy. Even during these prosperous years, the court was filled with rivalry, greed, and suspicion. While Richard ruled the north, his brother George, Duke of Clarence, got caught up in dangerous plots against their king. In candlelit chambers, secret plans and betrayals were quietly hatched under the cover of darkness. Tensions ran high even at the royal family's feast, where uneasy glances and silent rivalries threatened peace. In 1478, George of Clarence was accused of treason against the crown. Despite their brother Richard's efforts to save him, King Edward condemned George to death. George was famously executed inside the tower, said to have been drowned in a large vat of wine. The loss of his brother deeply shook Richard, reminding him how quickly fortune could change, even among royalty. Richard stood firmly loyal to Edward IV, unlike others who turned away. While schemes unfolded at court, Richard focused on maintaining order up north. He earned a reputation for loyalty and competence that would define his legacy. Loyal lords gathered around him, showing support and trust in his leadership. Even the common folk showed gratitude, bowing to their steadfast protector. In April 1483, King Edward IV passed away unexpectedly at just 40 years old. His sudden death sent shock waves throughout the kingdom, shaking the very foundations of the realm. His heir, young Edward V, was only 12. A vulnerable boy suddenly thrust onto the throne. In a land still healing from civil war, that kind of vulnerability often invited danger and uncertainty. Richard was named Lord Protector, entrusted to guard the young king until his coronation. Many believed this was a natural choice, since Richard had proven loyal and capable under Edward IV. But beneath the surface, ambitions grew. Old rivalries simmered and suspicion filled the council chambers. This parchment officially declared Richard as Protector, a title holding both power and peril. Before their coronations, Edward V and his brother Richard were kept in the Tower of London following tradition. But soon, whispers began to spread about the fate of the two young princes. The boys mysteriously vanished from public view, stirring fear and suspicion across the city. Rumors quickly pointed fingers at Richard, the protector who had seized the throne. In June 1483, Richard shocked the kingdom by declaring his nephews illegitimate, challenging the very heart of the royal succession. Citing a secret pre-contract of marriage from Edward IV, Richard removed the princes from the throne and crowned himself king. Some saw this as a just act, correcting a hidden wrong, while others viewed it as a cruel betrayal of the royal bloodline. Outside the throne room, the White Rose of York proudly flew high over London, marking a new and uncertain chapter for England. As king, Richard wanted to prove he was more than just a usurper. He introduced reforms that strengthened the justice system and protected common people from exploitation. Ancient manuscripts and legal documents show the new laws taking shape under his rule. But despite his efforts to be a fair and capable monarch, suspicion always lingered around his crown. The shadow of the vanished princes never left, casting doubt on his reign. Richard's grip on power was shaky, especially after the princes mysteriously vanished. This disappearance gave his enemies the perfect opportunity to strike. Discontented nobles and former allies began plotting behind closed doors. Meanwhile, across the Channel, Henry Tudor readied his claim to the throne. Even as Richard rose to the throne, whispers about the fate of Edward V and his brother followed him everywhere. Some say the boys were quietly smothered in their beds, while others believe they vanished under mysterious circumstances. Despite all the rumors, no clear proof ever came to light, leaving the story shrouded in shadow and suspicion. The mystery clings to Richard's legacy like a curse, forever haunting the pages of history. In July 1483, Richard was crowned in Westminster Abbey, surrounded by gold, velvet, and jewels. Yet beneath the dazzling ceremony, not all nobles were truly loyal. Some knelt out of duty, others hid silent resentment. The stained glass windows of Westminster Abbey cast colorful light over the tense gathering. Outside, London's crowded streets were filled with onlookers witnessing history unfold, uncertain of what the future held. Though Richard faced suspicion in London, he found unwavering loyalty in the north. From York to Middleham, his supporters gathered to cheer a ruler they saw as just and fair. To many, Richard was the defender against corruption and foreign threats, a true protector of his people. It was in the north that Richard's true strength was recognized and celebrated. Back in 1484, Richard's parliament passed some laws that even caught his critics off guard. He outlawed corrupt land seizures, giving people more security over their property. The king also reformed bail and jury processes to make justice fairer for everyone. Merchants benefited too, able to trade freely without fear of harassment. And common folks? They smiled hearing these new decrees that promised justice. Yet, despite these efforts, history remembered Richard mostly for the shadow over the princes. In the south of England, discontent simmered as former allies of Edward IV grew uneasy with Richard's rule. The Duke of Buckingham, once a loyal supporter, turned against Richard, leading a bold revolt in 1483. But disaster struck. Relentless floods and harsh weather ruined Buckingham's campaign and hopes for success. Captured and condemned, Buckingham's rebellion ended with his execution, sealing his tragic fate. In 1484, tragedy struck when Richard's only son passed away at Middleham Castle, leaving an empty place where hope once lived. Inside the cold walls, a child's empty bedchamber stood silent, a quiet testament to a life that was lost too soon. Anne Neville, his queen, wore her grief openly, dressed in mourning black, her sorrow palpable in every moment. And Richard, left without an heir, stood alone in the darkened hall of the castle, facing the uncertain future of his dynasty. In March 1485, Anne's life came to a quiet end, likely taken by illness. Whispers soon filled the air, as rumors spread that Richard might have poisoned her to remarry. Though no proof ever surfaced, these suspicions only deepened the king's isolation. With both his wife and son gone, Richard faced his enemies, haunted by doubt and loneliness. While in exile across the Channel, Henry Tudor was quietly building his strength and support. His claim to the English throne came through his mother, Margaret Beaufort, who had royal Lancastrian roots. Though his bloodline was considered weak, Henry's mission was clear. He aimed to unite the warring houses of York and Lancaster. He planned to secure peace by marrying Elizabeth of York, Edward IV's daughter, bridging two powerful families. This union was symbolized by the Tudor rose, blending red and white, representing a new era of unity and hope for the kingdom. As Richard's hold began to weaken, secret messages quietly passed through the hands of disillusioned nobles. Even his closest allies, once loyal on the battlefield, started to whisper promises to Henry. Messengers rode swiftly across the Channel, carrying fate with every galloping hoofbeat. Meanwhile, Richard paced alone in his council chamber, unaware how deep the betrayal had taken root. By the summer of 1485, England was a kingdom on edge, buzzing with rumors of an impending invasion. Richard quickly strengthened his defenses, rallying his supporters to prepare for what was coming. Heavy trebuchets and siege weapons were readied, signaling the seriousness of the looming conflict. Despite his strong armies on paper, Richard's trust in his nobles wavered. Who would stand by him when the battle began? On August 7, 1485, Henry Tudor landed on the rugged coast of Wales with a small but determined army. Though his forces were few, only a few thousand strong, Henry trusted the support of discontented English lords would join him. Step by step, he marched forward, gathering strength as Welsh supporters rallied to his cause. His journey moved steadily inland, as maps of medieval England trace his path toward the heart of the kingdom and his destiny. Richard didn't waste a second. He quickly gathered an army that could have been 10,000 strong. From Nottingham, he rode out with determination to face Henry head-on and stop the rebellion before it spread. His forces stretched far and wide, with lines of soldiers ready to fight for their king. At the heart of it all, the royal standard waved proudly, a symbol of what was at stake, the crown and England's future. As dawn breaks over rolling fields, two armies prepare to make history in Leicestershire. Richard sets his camp near a strong hill, taking a firm defensive stance. Henry, though outnumbered, moves forward cautiously with hope in his heart. On the morning of August 22nd, 1485, the scene is set at Bosworth Field for a decisive battle. As the sun crept over the horizon, Richard's army held the high ground, ready for what was to come. His men were well armed and disciplined, confidently prepared for battle. But not everyone there was fully loyal. Some lords in the ranks carried doubts and secrets. Richard watched the enemy approach from his horse, knowing this fight was about more than just numbers. The battle would be decided by trust and the shadows of betrayal that lurked within his own ranks. The battle erupted into chaos as arrows rained down from the sky, filling the air with deadly precision. Steel clashed relentlessly as lines of armored soldiers collided, their shouts echoing across the fields. Amid the fury, banners were trampled into the mud, marking the brutal cost of the fight. While Henry's men pushed forward with desperation, Richard's forces stood firm, holding their strong ground. Yet some lords chose to stand idle, watching from afar as the tide of battle swirled beneath them. The powerful Stanley family held back their thousands, watching as the battle unfolded without their support. At the crucial moment, the Stanleys turned their loyalty to Henry, changing everything. Richard's soldiers looked on in shock as their allies switched sides right before their eyes. Amidst the chaos, Richard's fury grew as he realized the battle was slipping away from him. Refusing to flee, Richard chose courage over retreat as the battle raged all around him. Spotting Henry Tudor in the distance, Richard lunged forward with everything he had. He cut down the enemy's standard-bearer, shaking the heart of the opposition. For a brief electric moment, it seemed victory might slip back into Richard's hands. Though Henry narrowly escaped, that furious charge became a legendary act of bravery. Richard found himself trapped, his horse stuck deep in the muddy marsh. Despite being surrounded and outnumbered, he fought bravely to the very end. As he fell, his last words echoed through the chaos, "Treason, treason." With his death, the crown of England slipped forever from the House of York. Silence took over as the king's lifeless body lay still, marking the end of an era. On the battlefield of Bosworth, Henry Tudor was crowned king right where victory was won. This moment marked the end of the Wars of the Roses and the start of the Tudor dynasty. Richard's defeated body was stripped and dishonored before being carried away. He was taken to Leicester, where he was buried quietly in a humble grave far from royal splendor. Richard III ruled England for just over 2 years, leaving behind a legacy that's still hotly debated. To some, he was a ruthless usurper and villain, accused of heinous crimes including the murder of children. But to others, Richard was a fair and just monarch, tragically betrayed and undone by political enemies. Shakespeare immortalized Richard's story as that of a deformed villain, shaping how centuries viewed him. Today, historians still debate what really happened and who Richard III truly was. The Battle of Bosworth marked the end of Richard's reign and the rise of Henry Tudor as King Henry VII. Henry's crowning at Westminster Abbey symbolized a new chapter for England. To unite warring houses, Henry married Elizabeth of York, blending two powerful bloodlines. The Tudor rose became a symbol of this new dynasty, proudly displayed across the kingdom. Though Henry's dynasty began with victory, it was also built on reshaping Richard's legacy. After seizing power, the Tudors worked hard to shape Richard's image into that of a villain. Chroniclers under Tudor influence described him as deformed, cruel, and thirsty for blood. One of the darkest parts of the story is the mystery of the princes locked away in the Tower of London. Tudor propaganda slowly spread through the courts, painting Richard as the ruthless murderer of the princes. More than 100 years after his time, Shakespeare brought Richard III to life on stage like never before. In his play, Shakespeare painted Richard as a cunning, twisted villain, bent on seizing the throne through lies and murder. This image of Richard was far from the truth, but it defined how generations imagined him. Meanwhile, Shakespeare himself worked late into the night, crafting words by candlelight that would echo through history. After the Battle of Bosworth, Richard's body was treated without honor, stripped and paraded through the streets. Eventually, he was laid to rest at Greyfriars Church in Leicester, a solemn and quiet place. But as centuries passed, the exact site of his burial was forgotten, lost beneath the growth of a changing city. What remained of the last Plantagenet king faded slowly into legend, hidden beneath layers of time and history. Legends have long surrounded Richard's grave, sparking countless stories and debates. Some say his body was cast into a river, while others believe it was stolen away. With no monument or tomb to mark the spot, his memory has become almost ghost-like. Part history, part myth. Sketches and drawings of lost graves and crumbling ruins tell the story of a past long faded. For centuries, historians have debated Richard's true legacy. Was he a ruthless tyrant or simply misunderstood? Victorian thinkers often romanticized his story, projecting their own ideals onto the past. At the same time, many clung tightly to Shakespeare's portrayal, seeing him as the ultimate villain. But beyond these stories, the real truth stayed hidden, waiting patiently to be discovered. In the early 2000s, a passionate group of researchers and history lovers came together with one mission: to find the lost remains of King Richard III. They believed that history had misunderstood Richard, and that only physical evidence could set the record straight. Using advanced technology, they created digital reconstructions of medieval Leicester to guide their search. Fueled by dedication and hope, the Richard III Society and their team worked tirelessly, proving that passion and science can rewrite history. Back in 2012, a routine excavation started in a Leicester car park with hopes of uncovering something unexpected. Excavators and archaeologists brushed away layers of earth, revealing clues hidden beneath the surface. From above, the city of Leicester stretches out, its modern life contrasting the secrets buried below. Then, the moment that changed everything, human remains began to emerge from the shallow grave after centuries underground. When the skeleton was uncovered, it revealed a curved spine, a clear sign of scoliosis. But it wasn't the monstrous deformity some stories had claimed. These bones tell a powerful story of a man who lived with pain, yet he still rode into battle, a true warrior king in armor. Brave knights clad in shining armor, charging forward despite the odds. Forensic experts carefully examined the skull, uncovering the story hidden in every wound. Advanced computer reconstructions reveal the multiple injuries Richard suffered during the chaos. Slow-motion battle scenes bring to life the fierce and chaotic fight at Bosworth. In his final moments, Richard fell bravely, surrounded by enemies, living and dying as a true warrior. To prove the identity, scientists carefully extracted DNA from ancient bones found beneath a city car park. They compared this DNA to that of living descendants from Richard's family tree, connecting history to the present day. Against all odds, the results were crystal clear. This was the skeleton of King Richard III himself. News spread quickly around the world about a discovery that changed what we thought we knew. The lost king, Richard III, had finally been found, bringing together science and history like never before. People lined up eagerly, drawn by a centuries-old mystery now solved in front of their eyes. Excited historians and locals shared their thoughts, feeling like part of this incredible moment. Richard's discovery reignited old debates among historians and fans of Shakespeare. Books about Richard III lined the shelves, each telling a different story. Public lectures often drew divided audiences, showing how opinions about him remained split. On one side, Shakespeare's notorious villain. On the other, the real man revealed by his skeleton. A more complex figure than history portrayed. Forensic artists used cutting-edge technology to bring Richard's skull back to life. Watch as the skull gradually transforms, showing the delicate contours of a real face. The result is stunning, a handsome man with sharp features quite different from what history imagined. For the first time in centuries, we can see the real Richard III side by side with the old paintings. In 2015, the remains of Richard III were finally given the proper funeral they deserved, more than 5 centuries after his death. The procession made its way through the streets of Leicester, drawing the eyes of many who came to witness this historic moment. Clergy led a solemn ceremony, honoring the last Plantagenet king with dignity and reverence. Inside Leicester Cathedral, mourners gathered as cameras captured this significant occasion, giving Richard III a farewell worthy of a king. Tens of thousands gathered along the streets of Leicester, coming together to pay their respects. Some saw him as a tragic figure, mourning what was lost in a turbulent past. Others honored him as a brave warrior who stood firm through conflict and betrayal. For England, this was more than remembrance. It was a step toward healing old wounds and uniting traditions. Even centuries later, Shakespeare's Richard III continues to captivate audiences as one of literature's most memorable villains. His sneer and cunning still dominate the minds of viewers everywhere, making Richard an unforgettable figure. But historians remind us that Shakespeare was writing during Tudor times, and the play reflects the political agenda of that era. In classrooms and debates, experts discuss how this portrayal was shaped as Tudor propaganda to influence public perception. Richard III was no simple villain or hero. He was a man shaped by turbulent times. Not just a warrior, he was also a reformer, signing important changes with steady hands. But his reign was marked by isolation and ultimate betrayal on the battlefield. Today, we piece together his story from candlelit manuscripts and faded memories. When Richard passed away, it wasn't just the end of a king's rule. It was the close of the Plantagenet dynasty, which had shaped England for over 3 centuries. This moment marked the shift from the medieval age of kings to the new era of the Tudors. And with that change, England began its journey towards the modern nation we recognize today. Richard III's story is one of history's greatest twists. A king lost to time and legend. Centuries after his death, his remains were unexpectedly discovered beneath a simple car park in Leicester. What followed was the incredible reconstruction of a face from bones, bringing history back to life. Richard's life was shaped by war, betrayal, and tragedy, culminating in one of England's most famous battles. His legacy reminds us that history isn't only written by the victors. It's for those who dare to question the past.